Hi. On the left is a classic, mint condition, unmodified Roland SH-101, and on the right is Behringer's SH-101 inspired MS-101. And the big question is, did Behringer do a good job recreating the SH-101's sound? This SH-101 was brought in by Isak, a true 101 fan, a good friend of mine who also happens to build his own synths as well as fix and modify among other SH-101s. Isak believes there's an important difference between the two and also agreed to a blind test, which we'll go through in a bit. The Behringer MS-101 was borrowed from another friend, and as per all my versus videos and reviews, this video is not sponsored by anyone except the people who support this channel on Patreon and the YouTube ad you just skipped. Before I get into the differences in sound between the two, mainly the oscillators and the filter, let's briefly cover the other differences. Generally speaking, the Behringer MS-101 has more features, certainly more than an unmodified SH. MIDI in, out, through, and over USB, a velocity-sensitive keyboard with velocity CV out, a triangle waveform, external audio in with level control, a broader range on the LFO, more modulation options. You can store 64 patterns with 32 steps each. Both the arpeggiator and sequencer have more features, and at $300, it's about a quarter of what a 30-year-old SH will cost you. The SH, though, does have a few feature advantages. It can be powered by batteries. Its sequencer can store up to 100 notes as opposed to the MS's 32, though it can only store one pattern at a time. It's lighter, though that may mean that it's not as sturdy as the MS. I don't know, Isak would not agree to a drop test. The knobs feel sturdier than the MS, and it has dust protection for the sliders, which the MS does not. The SH also has an additional portamento mode, one where regardless of whether you play legato or not, the notes will always glide from one to the other. Now, the SH can be modded to catch up to the MS on a few fronts with MIDI and modulation, as well as a PWM mod, which doesn't exist for the MS, at least not yet. Okay, so let's talk about the sound. In order to find out whether the MS faithfully replicates the SH, let's look at the three things that impact what we hear: the oscillators, the filter, and to a certain extent, modulation. Let's start with the oscillators. You can see the sawtooth looks a little bit different on the scope. Can you hear a difference? Seems pretty darn similar to me. Let's try out the square wave. The square wave on the SH looks more angled on the scope, and the even harmonics on the spectrum look higher on the MS. But can you hear the difference? Frankly, I can't tell them apart. Let's try out the pulse width. It seems like the SH goes slightly narrower than the MS. As I mentioned before, the MS also has an additional triangle wave oscillator, something that doesn't exist in an unmodded SH and is certainly nice to have. Let's try out the sub oscillators. You tell me if you can hear a difference. And let's go down 2 octaves. Moving on, there's actually quite a noticeable difference in the character of the noise. The MS is whiter and the SH pinker. Okay, let's move on to the filter. Let's take a listen without resonance. I don't know about you, but I can't tell the difference, and neither can Isak, so we're on the same page on this. When it comes to resonance, though, this is where the differences in the filter start. Listen to how the low end and the high end change as I bring up resonance. Notice how the resonance on the SH goes higher while it loses more bass, and the MS retains its bass, but the resonance doesn't go as high. Now, I think it's super subtle and I actually prefer a little bass with my resonance, but that raspiness may be one of the defining characteristics of the original SH. Okay, let's travel through the harmonics a bit. The SH seems a little bit more wobbly and sparkly than this. Let me play it again for you. The last element of the sound I want to talk about is modulation, and in particular the envelopes, and I think this is one of the most subtle differences between the two. If I take release all the way up, you'll see that the SH release is about 3 seconds longer than the MS release. Now, the length doesn't really matter because you can just change the sliders to make them match. The idea is that the curve is different. You can see that the SH curve is slightly more exponential and eases in more towards the end of its cycle. Again, super subtle, up to you if that's material. Okay, so let's try a blind test. The reason I think this test is interesting is because neither I nor someone else I ran it on passed it, but Isak got 20 out of 21 right. So I guess this is a test of whether you are a true 101 synth connoisseur, assuming the YouTube compression gods are kind to us. I'll also post the raw audio of this test on my Patreon if you want to check that out. I put together a simple decaying resonance filter sweep over Sawtooth. Here's what it sounds like on the MS. And here's what it sounds like on the SH. I'll play it either on the SH or MS and see if you can recognize which is which. At this point, you should pause the video and get pen and paper or something else you can write on and not chicken out. Go ahead, press pause, I'll wait. And you're back. Great! Look away from the screen, focus on the paper, and write down either MS or SH after you hear a sound. I changed the settings here a bit to keep it interesting. Alright, that's it. So this is what your paper should look like, and you can always scroll back and rewatch it or retake the test if you like. So what's the conclusion? That's really up to you based on what you heard and quote unquote if you passed the test, and if you did, whether the differences matter to you. Personally, I think that if you're looking for the mojo and feel of owning a 30-year-old classic, nothing but the original will satisfy you even if they sounded exactly the same. But if you're not hung up on that, Behringer have pulled off a great sounding synth with a taste of a classic at a price that's hard to beat. If you find this kind of insight useful, you might want to check out my book available to people who support this channel on Patreon, and you definitely want to ring the bell after hitting subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Hit like if this was useful and leave a comment below about what you think. Thanks for watching.
MS. 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 SH.
Daj!